So I'm measuring out one of my cuts into the steel. And I'll saw it over here with another saw. So I've got my metal ready. I'm just going to tap it down and then I'll get my welding gloves on. Now the piece is welded down nice and strong, so I can start with the support bars, and you'll see where I'm going with it in the next steps. I've got all 4 support bars cut. They'll fit up like this. I'll weld them together, and we'll be ready to work on the skeleton of the piece. Now, as you can see, I've got the plates tacked down in a lot of different spots. Now I'll fill those in by running a bead right along the line there. And the second set will be up a little higher. I drill the exterior armature so that I can attach the interior armature of the sculpture and create a stable piece that is also detachable from the armature, so that when we need to mold the piece, I can remove it from the exterior armature. Here I've roughed out the foam legs. Inside each one there's a piece of rebar. They're welded together with a hip cross member, which is then screwed into my armature. I've now measured out the torso piece, and so I'm going to weld this to the rest of the armature. As you can see, I tack welded on the arms, and now I'm going to weld them on completely. On this sculpture, I worked out the legs first just to get the vision of how the piece would look in motion. It helped a lot to carve those out and then weld the torso on. Normally I'll just weld the entire skeleton together and then start with the foam work. Here I'm working on the torso in foam and carving out the basic shape. As I get the shape, I try to think of keeping it just under where the clay is going to be. You don't want your foam to be too large to get in the way of your clay work. I work out some small places with foam, and then I begin placing clay over the entire piece. I always try to leave plenty of room for errors with the clay, because clay is a very forgiving material and foam is kind of hard to shape, so you just want to get the basic structure with the foam and not worry about detail or anything like that. The clay work's the exciting part. That's where I always feel like I've done all of the work and now the fun begins. If you go a little bit too far with your foam, it's never an irreversible mistake. I just pull out a saw or knife and shave down the foam work and then replace it, recover it with clay. It's really a lot of hand work, so I often use both hands when I'm roughing out the piece. And I try to think of the overall gesture, the movement and motion of the figure, and the form and shape of the body. Here I'm roughing out the head. I've placed the foam in the basic shape of the skull, and now I begin to cover it with clay. As the figure takes shape, I've removed the head and worked on it separately on a table. It's just a little easier than reaching over my head the whole time while I shape out the face. And it's something you can get away with early on when you're working on a piece. When I'm doing detail and the facial expressions, I like to keep it on the sculpture so that it matches the overall gesture of the piece. After replacing the head, I start to work out the neck. And suddenly he starts to look something like a figure. It's always kind of exciting when you had something that didn't look like anything at all, and it begins to shape a little bit towards your final vision. The main thing at this point with the clay work is to put together the basic shapes of everything, to get out all of the roughing in, the shapes and structures and the mass of the pants. Here I'm putting together the pockets that line the torso that go around the body armor of the Marine. I had to work from photos at this point. I didn't have any real body armor to look at or measure, and so I just got an idea visually of what scale those pockets would be. You'll see later I have to completely revise them, but it was important for me to move forward, so I began to work and shape the pockets. The pants are a lot further along now as well. As I rough out the arm, the motion of the figure starts to take shape. I've got a piece of rebar in each arm, and I weld tiny cross members to hold on hot wax. I push the warm wax around the rebar and the metal cross members to give an understructure to the clay. Wax is a lot harder than clay, and it can hold up the weight of the clay. It's also lighter per volume, so it works really well as a substructure for complex small areas like an arm or even a hand. I'm always taking careful measurements all the way through the piece of both my model and the sculpture. Here you can see I'm taking caliper measurements of the left arm to the right arm. I've also shaped out the chest and shoulders area a lot more than they originally were and defined the anatomy a little bit more. Now the directions of the clothing are taking shape. I try to keep everything so that it's not arbitrary. As I work out the strands of clothing, the flow of the drapery is very important in imparting the motion of the piece. When I work on the face, I usually work from a live model or from photos. Here I'm working from a live model, but you can see as the piece goes on, it doesn't look much like him. And I really don't want it to, but I do a lot of revisions on the face anyway, just to make sure that I get something that gets across the emotion and the concept that the overall piece is trying to project. It's very helpful to have a life model when you work on sculpture. It's easier to move from 3D to 3D than it is from 2D to 3D. So even though photos are helpful for technical information, like what type of gear or clothing somebody would have worn, it helps a lot more to have the actual gear or an actual live model standing for a piece. I take plenty of measurements with small calipers and large calipers, even on little areas of the anatomy like the ear. It's important to get everything in scale and also to give it that three-dimensional quality that makes it really come to life. I'm beginning the armature for the helmet. Every piece of the sculpture has to have something to support the weight of the clay. Here I take shish kebab skewers and press them into the clay. I then cover them with foil. This should be enough to hold up the weight of the clay for my helmet. Foil makes a good armature because it's bendable and it's easily adjustable if you accidentally mess up a little on your armature. I cover the foil with clay and begin to smooth it out into the shape of the helmet. I've got the basic shape worked out. It's a little crooked on his head, but I'm going to do a lot of revisions over the piece, even from here on out. I finally got my body armor in the mail, and so I'm ready to really work out those pockets and every other feature on the body armor. The piece wouldn't have been nearly as realistic if I wouldn't have had the real gear to actually look at and feel, measure and touch. So I tear down the old pockets and I begin working on the new ones. Each measurement's important, and as you can see, I take a lot of measurements on both the placement of the pockets, the scale of the pockets, and the shape of the pockets. The grenade pouch and everything on the body armor has to be in proportion to itself, and so it takes plenty of measurements and eyeballing as you step back and then you come in to work on the detail of the piece as well. Everything on the piece, no matter how minute, whether it's a little buckle or a little belt, has to be roughed in first. The basic shape has to be placed out on the clay. Then the detail and the shape can be refined. Sometimes it seems like a never-ending process on a sculpture like the Marine with so much gear. I haven't done much on the back of the piece. So as I work my way around, I begin to start the camel pack, which holds the water for the Marines in the desert gear. Foil again makes a great armature for this type of equipment. So So I take out some foil and crunch it and shape it into the shape of the camel pack. When I get it about right, I measure and make sure I get the placement perfect on the body armor. With shish kebab skewers, I stick it into the clay, and then I start shaping clay over it. Just like on the figure and everything else on the sculpture, I worry about the main shape, the main form, before I go in to work on any detail. Once the scale and form are correct, I have something that I can carve detail into. I take my tiny loop tools and work out all of the details based on the real item that's next to it. It helps to have a mannequin too to hang your gear on. That way you can have it nice and close and it'll be there 24/7 for you when you're ready to work. I take measurements of the cap, mark out those measurements, and then place clay on to create a clay cap. And then I begin pushing out clay to represent the belts. The wrinkles add richness to the entire camelback. I carve in deep impressions and then put ridges out to represent the wrinkles in the camelback. When I'm finished, it should look like it's full of water, just like the real one. I press out clay in the shape of the belts and then pull my rake tool across it to even it out. As I rake across the cap of the camel pack, it smooths it just enough to give it that realistic effect. The interesting thing about my pieces is that when you stand back, they seem to be completely realistic, and when you pull in close, they have that amount of detail, but they also are balanced by having a good amount of texture, so that you can tell they were handmade out of clay. I like that effect. Every little wrinkle has to be put in. Every little detailed feature is very important. I try to look at each item as being of equal importance so that I don't leave anything out. Whether it's putting together tiny lacings or a belt or buckle or even a tiny button, it's important to me to make it accurate. Perfection is always my goal with every piece, but especially when I'm doing a monument to our military. It means so much to them and their family that the least I can do is put the time in to get it right. Hopefully when it's over, people can't even believe that the items on the gear are handmade. They look at them and think that they're an actual camel pack hanging on this moraine, an actual body armor. I'm recreating a buckle now, and again I just press out the basic shapes, take my loop tools and carve it down. You'll see as I work on it that I generally work from larger tools to smaller tools. The larger loop tools help me get the shape and smooth it, and then the tiny loop tools and even needle tools help me to carve in the undercuts and detail that make it look like a real clip. At this stage, the clip is ready to be textured, but I hold off and I try to get everything to that same point of detail and then do the texturing all at once. I still haven't roughed in the hands, and hands are always a particular challenge. But as I rough in the hands, I try to remember that the gesture and overall form is what's important, and not think about the detail prematurely. The shape of the fingers is worked out over tiny wires. It's good to use wires that are thin because then the hands can be moved and shaped and you can get a gesture that looks spontaneous. So even after the clay is over the piece, I can move the fingers just a little bit and adjust them and impart that sense of motion that I'm trying to get across. I use the gloves that I have and place them on the model and watch his hands as he walks to try to get the exact sense of movement. And now the piece is really ready for detail. As the model stands in the gear, I work out every tiny wrinkle, trying to capture the feel of the clothes. This part can be kind of tedious, but it's also really fun because this is where the piece takes on a life of its own. I put in the tiny details and little things like the straps on the sides of the helmets. I work out on a separate table and then place them on the piece. I have all different rake tools with different textures, and as I create those textures on the clay, I try to mimic the sense of the textures that are on the actual item with my clay tools. I try to give it the same variety, even though I'm not doing the exact texture that's on the real piece. Usually I exaggerate and give it a little bit more texture. It keeps the piece visually interesting and allows the eye to see differences between areas of the fabric, skin, and other items on the piece. It really richens the overall detail of the piece. And I measure carefully so that I can find where each seam is. After I've measured on the real item, I place out those measurements on the clay and then create seams in the fabric by pressing my clay tool into the piece. Even though these seams are a little bit exaggerated, they'll show up a lot better in bronze, which is the final media for my clay piece. I delineate the seams and it just begins to give it that feel of real fabric. I always like this stage because it's such a simple way to really get across the feeling of the actual item I'm trying to depict. Those pockets were rough and canvassy, and so that's what I try to keep in mind when I'm doing the texture. So rather than using a real canvas texture, I create a texture that I think represents that fabric well. Even little items like buttons are important, so I press them out in clay, getting the shape just perfect before I call them finished. I use my tiny tools to work into the smallest of details. Little wrinkles in the pockets are important. They really pull out the life and the lifelike features of the piece. As I work out this button, I'm careful to present it as it really is. I like little things that richen the piece, like a button hanging out from a pocket that's a little bit unstrapped. It just seems like something that everybody has done, and it makes the piece feel a lot more lifelike in the end. After carving a slight depression in the button, I place 4 dots where the dots on the real button are, and my clay button begins to take shape. As we pull back, you can see all of the textures meld in to show the detail of the overall piece. The goal with the textures is to richen the piece and also to bring unity to it. So though I don't use too many tools, I can use them in different ways to give an overall feel and still unify the piece. Even items like hoses on the camel pack are rolled out in clay and placed on the piece just like they are on the real item. After I place the clay perfectly, again I have to texture it so that it gives the effect of the real hose, which is covered in a coarse fabric. When the piece is finished, I'm very pleased with the motion that it captures and the emotion in the face. The Marine looks apprehensive, yet brave. You get that sense that he's ready to go to war, but somewhat fearful of the unknown.